Hello to everyone joining us to the first of our AI Around the Globe webinar series, today with a specific emphasis on Europe. And we have today on the agenda a number of really great panelists that we are very happy to be able to welcome today. Welcoming today, first of all, we have Jamie Berryhill, who is an innovation specialist at the OECD Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. His work includes surfacing and tracking innovation trends and conducting research on the intersection of innovation and digital government. I'm also very pleased to welcome today Dr. Inga Olnikan, who has more than 10 years of international and interdisciplinary experience of teaching, research and engagement, in particular in the field of science, technology and innovation policy and governance. And finally, joining us today will be Colin van Noordt, who is a Ph.D. researcher at the Ragnar Nurkse Department of Innovation and Governance at the Tallinn University of Technology, and an external expert, for the European Commission AI Watch team and in other digital government research projects. My name is Walter Pasquarelli. I work for Oxford Insights, specifically for on the benchmarking projects, indexing projects. I have been working together with Eleanor Shearer and Richard Sterling on the AI Readiness Index 2020. And I will start just by providing a very quick outline of the AI Readiness Index before we go into the presentations and the Q&A with our panelists. The AI Readiness Index is the world's first study assessing governments' preparedness to integrate AI into their public services. As I've just mentioned, this year is already the third iteration of this year's index. We had a first iteration that started already in 2017 that measures all the OECD countries. And now in 2019, we had the second iteration of the AI Readiness Index, which measured all the UN countries and included for the first time also a number of regional analyses that covered the different regions of the world. This year, what we did is that we still analyzed all the countries in the world. However, we were able to add a number of indicators that made our methodology significantly more comprehensive and that made our methodology significantly more robust. We have also added a number of country-specific analyses for each of the regions in the world. So we have for each region around 2 or 3 countries that we looked into that we thought are either regional leaders, that are rising stars, or that are countries to watch. And finally, what we have done as well this year is that we have piloted for the first time the responsible use of AI. In the past couple of years, we've seen several cases of how AI was implemented. In some cases, it has been very successful. In some other cases, it did have some unintended consequences. So this was an element that we thought would be incredibly important to integrate in this year's discussion as well. So the main question that we have asked ourselves throughout this years, and this is really the thing that has stayed the same thing in the past 3 years, is a question, well, what makes a country AI ready? For us, we see it as 3 pillars needing basically to be analyzed. On the one hand, given that we are talking about government AI readiness, really the question of government and how government performs is of incredible importance. We think that a government needs to have really an appreciation of emerging technologies, and a willingness to embrace these technologies and integrate them into their public services. Some good proxies for that are, for instance, well, does a country have a national AI strategy? But that, as Colin mentioned earlier, that is probably not enough. But we really need to look at what kind of measures does government have in place so that AI readiness is not just a theory, but it is something that can actually be implemented in the public sector and can actually change lives. Secondly, and that is really almost a prerequisite of AI readiness, is the infrastructure. So what kind of infrastructure do I have in a country? Is there enough data available for creating artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence is based upon data, and so having data that is available, data that is of good quality, and data that is also representative is something that is of incredible importance in order to create AI that is accurate and efficient. And finally, the final pillar that we thought is crucial is, of course, the technology sector. For us, what we really try to do is not looking at AI in just like the whole capacity in a country, but looking more at the government. So why does the technology sector matter in this case? It matters because a lot of technology companies, they can then develop services that can be adopted by government, that can be used by citizens, and there can really be created some synergies from which governments particularly can benefit. So this is a very quick overview of kind of the work that we have been doing in the past couple of years, and also a very quick overview of what this year's Government AI Readiness Index looked like. We will share later today after the webinar not only the report from the AI Readiness Index, but also other relevant literature that attendees might be interested in reviewing. So without further ado, I will now just give the floor to Jamie, who we're very excited about having joining. Jamie has been doing some research specifically about the use of AI in public sector and AI strategies. And we are very excited to have him present today. Jamie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can I get permission to share my screen?
Yes. It should be working now.
All right. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Hi, everybody. My name is Jamie Berryhill from the OECD Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. So we, at the OECD in general, our kind of big flagship operation when it comes to AI is our AI Policy Observatory. So this is one central location. It's a cross-cutting initiative throughout the OECD where all of our efforts kind of culminate. And it's a big repository of all that we know of AI in the public sector, all that we know of government initiatives to promote AI throughout society, throughout the private sector. So this is kind of our general hub, and it's all at OECD.ai. I don't actually work for the AI Policy Observatory. I'm part of something called the Observatory of Public Sector Innovation, which does broader-based work. And one thing that we do is AI, and we work with the AI Policy Observatory regularly when it comes to how AI works in terms of public sector transformation and innovation. So specifically on how do governments use AI to transform their own policy design, their own policy or service design and implementation. So we focus in that area. So at the observatory, just a brief overview of what we do is we have kind of three core pillars to our mission. One is providing trusted advice to governments around the world. So we work on a one-on-one basis on advising countries on how to improve the innovation systems, how to develop an AI strategy, how to develop other types of policies and strategies for improving emerging technology in their country, or skills or systems thinking. Uncovering what's next, we surface trends in innovation and things that governments will see more and more going down the line, and turning the new into normal, where seeing things that are happening kind of at the edge, but folding them into government's day-to-day operation and making innovation in government something that's everybody's job and something that governments are continuously trying to do. I think the work that we do in AI kind of fits across these in different ways. And our main work there so far has been a report and an analysis of country approaches to artificial intelligence. in a report called Hello World, Artificial Intelligence and Its Use in the Public Sector. And I think, Colin, I remember seeing your name when we did a public consultation on this. Your remarks helped us out a great deal. So in this primer, what we call an AI primer, we try to break down the concept of artificial intelligence at a level that perhaps non-technical civil servants or public leaders can understand and help them have more informed conversations about AI in the public sector, more informed negotiations with private sector vendors, and just kind of a more informed approach to how AI can and can't work in government, things they might want to consider. So it's kind of broken into three parts where it's a background and technical explainer that walks you through the technical aspects of AI, the public sector landscape as it is now, or as it was at the end of last year when this report came out. So kind of where governments are with strategies and implementing those strategies. And then a kind of chapter on guidance on government implementations, implications and considerations on things that they should think through when approaching AI and perhaps building out AI systems. And some of our report findings were, as was touched on earlier, a growing number of countries with AI strategies. When our report came out, we saw 50 national AI strategies, and that number has grown since then. I think it's probably about 60 or 70 at this point, including a majority of which have a specific subfocus, or even a few countries who have a dedicated strategy of their own, specifically on public sector AI. And this is just a map real quick, and I'll bounce back to here in a second. We also saw that some of the best practices or things that led to a strong maturity in AI in certain governments were a strong focus on evaluating options. So determining whether AI was the best solution for a given problem, and finding ways to approach that. We have some case studies in this report on New South Wales in Australia, for example, on how they evaluate whether something is a good problem to try to explore with using AI versus not, or versus a more traditional technology. Space for experimentations and flexibility before leading up to full implementation has kind of been another successful key success factor we're seeing in governments who are really moving ahead in not only developing their AI strategy, but in actually implementing AI strategies. Here we have things like New Zealand Service Innovation Lab, which is something that we really supported and thought we're doing a really great job, which is kind of something that's gone defunct at this point, but thought that really set a positive trend on how things could work in government, even though sometimes the support isn't there as much as you would like. Really strong ethical and trustworthy frameworks, where the OECD has its own internationally agreed upon framework, which is, I believe, the first internationally agreed upon ethical framework. But then some countries like Canada that are taking that kind of to the next level and finding ways to really actualize and implement these high-level principles and high-level ethical values into something more operational. The access to and use of data, so both within the government and trying to work with the private sector to obtain private sector data that government can also use to feed into its own systems. And we have a case here on the US Federal Data Strategy and Roadmap. And finally, a government capacity to both harness internal and external talent to kind of get the needed expertise into government, or working with government to build out these systems and also work through these considerations that really need to be done within one's own context. So we kind of, within this report, build out a bit of a framework or a series of things government should think through when exploring AI, when building an AI strategy, when iterating or advancing on their AI strategy, and moving towards those goals. And this was a bit of a map that I showed a second ago. That was where we saw kind of governments at the time and at the end of last year. And even since now, we've seen tremendous growth. So Europe in particular, I think we have almost every single country, just about, like, since we did this, I think Bulgaria and Hungary and Latvia, Netherlands, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia have fully issued an AI strategy, with a couple left that are still like just fully actively drafting and working on it. I don't think there was a single one left that hasn't made a formal commitment to issuing one soon. And in the Middle East, it seems like things are not as rapidly moving, but they are catching up very quickly. We work a lot with the UAE, for example, who is a regional leader and with a lot of efforts coming out of countries like Egypt and Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Tunisia. So a lot of advancements going on there. I think that within the OECD, or at least within my team and our perspective, was things were kind of moving really full steam ahead up through the end of 2019. And then kind of COVID really kind of slowed things down a bit. And we work on external demand and people getting in touch with us and asking us questions. And like that stream or that torrent of people interested in public sector AI really ran dry for a bit, with the exception of some innovative uses of using AI to kind of come up with creative, innovative solutions for responding to the COVID-19 crisis. But just in the last few weeks, we're really starting to see interest rapidly pick up again. People are realizing that this item that they put on the back burner is still very important, and they're coming back to it. I'd say just in the last month is when we've really seen a kind of big new resurgence in external interest and external demand. So we're all here and talking about the AI Readiness Index, which I think really parallels well with and fits in well with a new item that we put out just last week from our colleagues in our digital government and data unit that we work with regularly, which tries to get a handle on government's digital maturity in general, which we think governments need a very strong foundation in digital maturity broadly in order to really be doing the kind of leading edge things and working through all the different challenges and considerations they need to be thinking through when it comes to something that's probably a bit more advanced than when it comes to things like AI. So just last week, we and our colleagues on the digital government team had launched the Digital Government Policy Framework and Digital Government Policy Index, which works with that, which tries to measure 6 key aspects of digital government maturity. And those items have been broken down in terms of digital by design, government as a platform, data-driven public sector, open by default, user-driven, and proactiveness. And this collection of factors, we believe, really kind of builds a foundation for how governments can be digital and broadly, and then also have the skills, resources, reflexes, and mindsets and cultures that are needed to bring about public sector AI. As you can see here, I've kind of highlighted the ones that are relevant for this particular geographic area. We have kind of Europe spread all through, like the half of it's on the upper half of the OECD, the other half's on the lower half of the average, just showing that we kind of have a wide spread of what we would refer to as digital maturity in the area, but different aspects of it. So I think going forward, a big task for us is going to be trying to, now that we have a handle on where countries are, we'll be working with these countries on understanding why countries are so high in certain areas, or what kind of underlying characteristics they have that make them strong, and then working with other countries who may be weaker in those areas to try to build everybody up to a common baseline, so we have a strong baseline to work from and can be working on things like AI together. And just a quick overview of how these elements work. In terms of AI, so the digital by design element really kind of establishes clear leadership and paired with effective coordination and enforcement for how AI would work throughout government. The government as a platform element is really about developing clear and accessible and common resources and tools, such as guidelines and common components that can be used in a government-wide way. With open by default, we're looking externally to strengthening interactions between government and non-government actors. It kind of gets into the piece on the tech industry that we talked about earlier, and making sure that the government knows how to have these conversations and knows how to work in an environment where there's different players that come on board. And then user-driven and proactiveness really kind of build on these previous aspects to ensure that when it comes to AI, governments are user-driven when they're establishing new ideas, seeking to achieve legitimacy and trust among their people, and that governments are being proactive and trying to offer a seamless and convenient experience for their citizens. And kind of the whole underlying premise here is building a culture of change and building a culture that can support these new types of technologies that are rapidly evolving, and government being able to keep up with the pace of change. And we think that all of these factors are related to promoting AI within the public sector and promoting it in a way that's done in a stable and trustworthy way, so everybody's confident in going into it, and the public is confident that the way the government is engaging with AI is being done within the public interest. We don't really have much data on the Middle Eastern region right now, and it's something that we do work with many countries. We just haven't had an opportunity to really kind of deploy a massive survey among those countries like we have with the countries that are listed here, but it's something that we want to continue to expand and continue to do. This was kind of our initial shot at doing something like this, and I suppose it's kind of how the AI Readiness Index has expanded quite a lot and covers so much more ground than the 2017, and I hope it's something that we can kind of continue to build out, and maybe we can even try to find a way to work in each other's indexes and as another additional metric to seeing how governments are performing. So with that, I just want to plug real quick that we are having an upcoming event that anybody that's attending this webinar is more than welcome to join us at. So on the November 17th and 18th, we're having an event fully virtual called Government Aftershock, where the first day is a series of decentralized events happening around the world that any organization could pick up and plug into and hold a local event. And then on the 18th, we're having a central virtual program. And kind of the premise is it's been a tremendously difficult and challenging year for governments all around the world. So what can we learn from this, and to help ensure that the crisis that everybody's been going through, that we can derive some lessons from it and really reflect and think about it. So with that, I'd encourage anybody here to register who's interested in learning about these events. AI will sure to be a topic on the agenda, probably woven throughout in different ways. And with that, I just want to say thank you very much for having me. And this is my contact information if anybody wanted to get in touch with me or my team to learn more about the work that we're doing in AI or more broadly.
Thank you very much, Jamie. This has been an incredibly interesting presentation. I am particularly intrigued by the fact that, as you mentioned, like during this pandemic that we're still going through, a lot of the governments sort of started initially putting like cultivation of AI readiness and deployment initially paused it, but now as sort of governments are so slowly going through this pandemic that they're now picking it up again, shows really what kind of priority it is across several regions of the globe. And I think it's really fascinating to see, because it shows that it's really something that goes really deep into like how government is built and how government will be innovated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The second presentation today will be from Inga. Inga has been doing work specifically around the vision of the European Union and human-centric AI, which is something that, especially in these times, I think is incredibly important. And so we very much look forward to hearing your thoughts and your experience in this, Inga.
Thank you very much for this opportunity and for inviting me. And I will briefly talk about vision, because vision is one of dimensions for this Government AI Readiness Index. And within this Government AI Readiness Index, the way vision is measured and indicated for it is if a country, if a government has launched its national AI strategy. And national AI strategies, many have been launched over past years already. In previous presentation, Jamie told that the number of these national AI strategies around the world is increasing very rapidly. When you also read this report on Government AI Readiness, you can also see that very interesting developments have happened in the past year. If previously, mostly these government AI strategies have been focused in global north, then within past year, as you will see very nice maps in the report, they have also been starting to emerge in other regions around the world. And with my team here at the Montfort University, over past years, we have done some analysis of different strategies launched by national governments, also by international organizations, think tanks, and so on. And it raises a lot of interesting questions. Soon also some of our work should be published and come out. But in this very brief presentation, I would especially like to focus on EU vision. Because we are talking here about Europe, and of course in Europe there are many national strategies, but at the same time there is also this joint EU level vision, which we can find in a number of documents, in EU AI strategy, in coordinated plan, in guidelines for trustworthy AI, and also white paper, a number of documents accepted over past years. And what is one of the interesting questions, of course, there are many AI strategies, but then what is really content, are they aiming for, and what is how similar or different they are. And the EU aims to define itself as having a unique approach based on human-centric AI. And EU says that this human-centric AI means that technology is not an end in itself, but technology is more as a means to improve well-being of individuals and society. And some of examples you can find in EU documents is, for example, that AI should help to attain sustainable development goals or goals of EU Green Deal, and that this AI development also should take place in line with the European Union values, which are enshrined in EU treaties, such as, for example, human dignity and freedom and democracy and rule of law. And very interesting is also that the EU puts this approach at the core when it tries to position itself globally. We can find statements in EU documents that says, okay, there is global competition going on between US, between China, and the EU is not so much about winning or losing this race, but more using these opportunities really to implement AI, which is in line with its values and which is really human-centric. That is very ambitious vision, and it also raises a lot of interesting questions about how to really implement this vision and what it means in practice and what it also means in practice in these very challenging times. And it's also very interesting in light of this Government AI Readiness Index. And so to facilitate discussions, I would like to, in the remaining time, pose 3 open questions for reflection and also for indicating some future work. And my first question is, what is government AI readiness worth in times of global pandemic? So global pandemic is also mentioned in a report as a use case. It has also mentioned already before. And it's interesting to reflect how government AI readiness goes in line with fighting global pandemic or doesn't go in line. Because in an ideal world, countries which are more AI ready should be most ready also to tackle global pandemic, because they can use all kind of data and analysis and prediction to develop and implement the COVID fighting strategies. When we look on this, who are the top countries, we see that top countries in global AI readiness is US and is UK. And if we look on COVID data, on infection data, on also death numbers, these are not the best countries in fighting COVID. And then the question is, what is the link? Why is this, is it working? Is it not working? Is really AI readiness a priority in times of COVID? Because these are extremely challenging times for many national governments and international organizations. COVID is ongoing. It's not known how long it will be, but there are increasing pressures on public budgets, on public administration. Should resources really go into AI readiness, or should resources go in healthcare, in social safety nets, in economy? And when and how really AI can be of help here? That's my first question. My second question is, should responsible use of AI be core of government AI readiness? So this is very nice to see in this report that there is this sub-index of responsible use introduced, which comes in this report for priorities of Canadian government, but it is also a priority in line with EU approach of, to human-centric AI. And it's interesting that those top countries in the Government AI Readiness Index, UK and US, are not doing so well in responsible use index. And there is, again, shouldn't all government AI readiness be responsible? And could this be rather than separate sub-index, but instead be part of the core of this government AI readiness, that it's all responsible? And my very quick final question, is it time to move beyond just readiness and also look on implementation? Because it's nice that many countries have adopted these national AI strategies. And now it's really important to see how it is implemented, because implementation is absolutely key. How this AI will work, will it be human-centric, will it be responsible, and whose interest it will serve? Thank you.
Thank you, Inga. This has been an incredibly great presentation, and especially the 3 questions that you've just asked are questions that I think are more than legitimate. We've thought very hard on, for instance, like responsible AI. How can we should we integrate this as part of, say, AI readiness as a whole? Should we integrate this? Should we make this a separate thing? Is being strong in AI, does this mean also being responsible? We thought it's 2 different things, which doesn't necessarily mean that being strong in AI makes you a great tech power necessarily, right? And the second point, I also agree, like from AI, the bridge from AI readiness to deployment is one which is incredibly important. We have a lot of countries that are incredibly strong at AI readiness, but somehow do not have a very strong AI implementation yet, and you don't. We find public services that are maybe not old-fashioned, but nearly there. And that brings me probably also really to the third presentation, because it's the one from Colin, which I think earlier when we just started when we just like had our briefing for the panel, I was really fascinated by the comments that we had, which really brings together Inga's presentation and Colin's ones, which is like there is a difference between AI readiness and AI implementation. And so Colin has been working on researching innovation in the public services in the public sector, and has been specifically looking at making the transition from strategy to implementation, and especially the challenges that we encounter while we do this transition. Colin, I would love to hear more from you. So the floor is yours.
Okay, I hope you see it well. The presentation is good. Can you hear me too?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, thank you for the introduction, and indeed a perfect bridge to my presentation, because this is indeed, I think, even more fundamental challenge, but also where the more exciting discussions even take place, because this is the real nitty-gritty of implementation. So indeed, like Walter introduced, I research a lot the use of AI in public services, and trying to assess the potential, but also the downsides, and finding a way to measure the impact of this technology in terms of public values, right? So what are these consequences? But why are we discussing AI? Is that there is indeed this great potential for it, and we have seen already some of use of AI in various government services, but in general there's this great expectation that with new data sources, with new forms of analytics, automation, you name it, that there will be new and better improved policy, because it's less abstract, it's based on results, it's more evidence-based. There's also a way to improve the way public services are delivered now. So think of initiatives and goals to make it more proactive. So instead that you go to the office and you have to fill in the form and then they check, the government can analyze the previous data and give you a heads up, like, hey, you may be entitled for this certain benefit, or hey, you applied for student allowances, but maybe you also are interested in these 2 elements. So it's way more proactive towards the citizens, and there is a great deal of AI behind using, enabling these kind of services. But of course also internal management, right? So think of procurement, think of HR within the public administration. There's a lot of interesting way to improve the internal mechanisms of policy, and we really see experiments heading into this way, right? So imagine that public procurement is a very massive amount of money across in the whole world. I recently heard something about 16% of the worldwide GDP. That's massive, right? So if we can even improve this process, make it more efficient, more effective, this is a massive gain through these kind of technologies. But of course, are we there really? So there's a lot of I really like the report of the Readiness Index, because it shows, in a sense, like the ingredients are there, right? Now the cook needs to cook it. But this is where the challenge lies. So recently, I think this week, there was a report from the Oxford Internet Institute on the global risk perception of decision making in AI. So you see this map on the left, and you see that especially in America, but also in Europe, there's a general quite risk-averse attitude towards automation and the use of AI technologies, especially in areas where arguably they have the most potential, right? So assisting doctors, assisting governments, these kind of services where these are very seen as risky, so we should not do it. So citizens don't like these kind of technologies, but it goes beyond that. So this is the other one, is a framework from the academic literature from Wilson-Way and Gehr, where they looked at all kinds of different barriers that are already existing, hindering the adoption and the implementation of AI. And this runs from the technical aspects onwards to the more ethical frameworks, the societal and regulation, because as also Walter introduced, sometimes governments don't want to perhaps change, but very often there's also just a law that is blocking this change. And this needs to be converted, and law changing can take a long time, especially if it's a European law hindering certain things, right? This can take 6 years. So there's 6 years of non-adoption where it could actually have a very big benefit. So this is the real challenge in a way, to move beyond the strategies of readiness onwards and more towards the organizational level, or even the individual level in the government, where they use these systems in day-to-day practices. This is still very difficult. So a part of my research, I've been working with the AI Watch of the European Commission. And what we try to do here is to learn from what is happening right now. So and this is more challenging than you think, because these use cases of artificial intelligence, like the implementation and adoption, they're quite difficult to find. Often they are still in early stages, proof of concepts, they're still in development. There's maybe a short pilot here and there. And this is, so in the end, we found around 230 cases. Likely there's more. But we don't have the exact numbers yet. But these they're like a list of illustrative cases that we have found all across Europe. As you can see, in certain countries, I only managed to find one, but in others, there's way more experimenting going on. And this is already a bit old. This is already a few months old, a document. There's still ongoing research with hopefully more the example, right? This is our inventory, and you can really learn a lot from seeing each of the individual cases, how it came to be, what was needed to really go from the development onwards to the adoption, and then even hopefully routine implementation in the organization, but on a more sustainable level. So what we've also seen is that if I go back to my old database of this, I really can cross out at least 10 cases that are now dismantled because of either ethical concerns, legal complaints, or just because it didn't work as well as they thought to be. So this is very much unexplored territory, but fundamental in moving beyond the expectations. We really need to see the value, and if citizens see the value of these kind of technologies making their life easier, then of course citizen acceptance will go much higher. So what I would like to conclude with is mind the gap between strategy and reality. So in a lot of strategies, luckily what Jamie also mentioned is there is usually a section on the public sector, but if you go really deep into the text, you will often find that actually the public sector is often just seen as a facilitator and a regulator. of AI technologies, but they also can use the same technologies to improve their own services, their own organization, and they should, because how can you regulate something you have very little experience with yourself? So this is quite fundamental, but now there's a bit more attention, but especially 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, you hardly ever heard about AI in government. Usually it's all, you know, everywhere but in government. So this is still very much overlooked but fundamental. And also we need to have these enabling factors. It's the ingredients, but more like the readiness, not on the country level, but also on the organizational level. So they need funding, they need to have the capabilities, they need to have the culture to try out these kind of technologies. It has to be in an ethical way, but both for citizens, also for the civil servants. And also, for sure, there's high quality data ecosystem, which may be present, may not be present, but this is very context dependent, and this needs to be evaluated on case by case basis. What we know is that these enabling factors are still very challenging, especially funding is very often not mentioned in the strategies with regards to public sector. The funding goes to companies or to startups, which is good too, but not only, not enough. Likewise, there are plenty of legal, technical, organizational barriers that hinder the adoption, but consequently also the implementation. So very often what we have seen is that civil servants are very hesitant of using these new technologies if they feel their job are threatened. So they will find all kinds of ways to block the project or to hinder it from working properly. So there is still a big gap between going from the data to actual action with the results of the data. And likewise, I also saw Jamie mention it in his slide that is AI a solution to the problem, right? So it is not always a silver bullet, very often not in fact. It's not a goal on itself. So we need to make sure that it ensures public value. It solves a certain problem, and it's not a nice gimmick project from someone who wants to see, hey, look, I also have a chatbot or an AI project. It needs to be linked with public value, and that is very vital to also move towards citizen acceptance and trust, of course. And then the last risk we have seen is the ever pilot. So this is the problem that there is a good solution there, but it's still outside of the regular organization, right? So this is one pilot project that gets good results, but has very much difficulty in scaling up within the organization and even out of the organization. So solutions that work in the Spanish police are not used anywhere else but the Spanish police, which is, of course, can be used all across Europe. Or within a country, we have a solution that works very well within a certain administration, and that could work perfectly fine in all others. But this is scaling out is still a big problem, and this hopefully gets tackled soon. So thank you very much. If there are any questions, please ask. I would be very happy to answer them. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your great presentation, Colin. I especially love the part, you have the ingredients, now the cook needs to cook.
Yeah,
I think that's a very accurate analogy, but also the fact that you might not always need AI, right? Sometimes it's just sometimes it works best if you just don't put technology on it. Just like as I read a piece a while back ago that said you won't save democracy by throwing a neural network on it, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, and coming back to the cook analogy, you also need to make sure the customer wants to eat the dish you in the end make, right? So this is fundamental. We cannot focus only on having the flashiest ingredients, but we need to make sure the cook knows what he's doing, but also that the end user is also enjoying his meal.
Absolutely. So I would like to open up questions from the audience if we have any. We have a few questions otherwise prepared, but it will be great to hear any questions from the audience if there are any. So I'm just going to wait about 45 seconds. Otherwise, I'll throw my own questions to the panelists. There's a question coming. We have a question from Scarlett. How can we ensure that governments shift from AI readiness to deployment in their public services? So I think that's a really fascinating question. Thank you very much for your question, Scarlett. There are a number of countries, in fact, that, for instance, when we analyze them, they score incredibly high in AI readiness, but then in the actual implementation, whilst we do not have a benchmarking tool for it yet, all the evidence points to the fact that actually the implementation is still quite low. So why is that the case? And especially the question here would be, how can we ensure the government shift from AI readiness to deployment? I will just throw the question first to Colin, as he dealt with this directly, and then Inga, and then Jamie.
Yes, thank you, Scarlett. This is a very fundamental question, right? So this is very much still ongoing work. There's a number of ways which I personally think are essential to moving towards the readiness. And I think it starts within the administrations, right? They need to have the capacity to see both the possibilities of the new technologies, a problem where to apply the technologies, and also the methods and the ways to develop and then implement these solutions. Sounds very easy, but in fact, in reality, this is extremely challenging. So we need to make sure that public civil servants from the top to the bottom level, they need to know the technology, what it can do, how it can help their work. But they need also to have ways to innovate and to challenge the status quo of public service delivery they have right now. This is often very, established already, and it can be very challenging to convince upper management to, start innovating, changing the ways they've been doing things for the last 20 years. So this is quite fundamental. I do like a lot of the initiatives that are now ongoing, where governments organize these hackathons, where they bring together both public managers, civil servants, and startups and other enthusiasts to find solutions to problems they have and come up with crazy new innovative ideas, put some funding behind it, and then see where it leads. I think these are already great first steps to help coming from readiness to deployment, but it's a challenging one for sure.
Thank you, Colin. I would love to hear Inga's opinion on that.
I would like to add, if Colin talked a lot about the government capacity and public administration capacity, I would like to add another ingredient, and namely demands coming from stakeholders, different types of stakeholders, civil society organizations, all kinds of interest groups, think tanks, experts, because they are also formulating demands to the government, and we are also having government accountable, and they could also be part of realizing in forms of co-creation and collaboration many of these benefits.
And just to add on those comments, I definitely agree with both of those, and I think that for your average civil servant who wants to get into this, to really encourage them to be able to get involved and to move from these lofty plans and ideas and principles and strategies to actual implementation is to make them feel safe. Everyone knows that government is like a terribly risk-averse place to be, and nobody wants to be the first ones doing something. So I think that sometimes when we were working with countries and doing our research, the areas in which people felt safe to experiment and safe to explore were the most successful. And I think that like some factors into that were just like, of course, there's always the factor of strong leadership saying go out and do it. So those people have kind of top cover to try new things. But then there was like de-risking solutions. Like the most successful example that I always point to is Canada's algorithmic impact assessment, where there was a center of government effort to actually take ethical principles and actualize them into a kind of a risk-based approach to implementation. So any civil servant who had an idea for a project could go online, use a digital tool that they kind of almost like a BuzzFeed quiz that they fill out about what project they want to do, and it gives them a prescription of exactly what steps you need to follow in order to make that happen. And that's so it kind of takes some of the guessing game out of, am I doing this right? Am I following all the right rules? And it makes them feel more empowered and more safe because they're not assuming all the risk themselves.
Thanks, everyone. That's incredibly useful. And so that brings me also probably in some parts to a question that just arrived here from Fatima. Fatima just mentioned a significant part of the Middle East is reeling under wars. It is no longer a question of whether government preparedness, but more of whether the government is still there in the first place. Still, a number of such countries is exploring AI-based solutions, teaching or researching in AI at all grassroots level. So how can such groups be assisted in order to harness the human potential there? I think this is a very important and probably also a very difficult question to answer. I would just like one of the panelists, is there anyone who would like to step forward with to answer this question directly?
Could you say the last part of the question one more time? I was trying to.
Of course. Yeah. How can such groups, such as like grassroots movements, how can they be assisted in order to harness the human potential, say at the grassroots level, considering that some countries, specifically in the Middle East, have been reeling under wars?
I suppose just some quick thoughts that would be to leverage other existing grassroots and open source communities that are doing this sort of thing. Like, I mean, if you're talking about extreme like basics and just getting people to understand AI in general, then sign up for like Finland's Elements of AI class. If you are looking to get more involved at a significant and substantive way, join one of the just become more involved in or more aware of like the other kind of big networks and communities that are already existing out there that don't really have these kind of distinctions between like government and everyone else or between like national borders. And I think there are different kinds of communities and groups out there that you could become a part of.
Yeah, perhaps to add on that, of course, this is it's a difficult situation. That's clear. But at the same time, public services will still be there. There will still be a demand for public services, whether the government is doing it or perhaps a grassroots initiative or a group of NGOs. So in that sense, perhaps it's even better that it comes from the citizens' initiative themselves rather than top-down push on how it should be done from the government. But yeah, like Jamie said, for me personally, it would be connect as much as possible with the international community, try to leverage as much as free resources as possible, and yeah, see if it grows from there. But it's clear this is challenging. You need to have a stable government system, but like also what we've discussed before, you need some level of digital maturity in the government to really go beyond what is happening there now. So yeah, clearly a government is needed to go into an AI-enabled government, but I would not be discouraged that there's still a lot of potential, perhaps even more, to start at the grassroots, see what are the services citizens really need and how can AI help in this respect.
Thank you, Colin. Any other comments before we go to the closing section? Great. Thank you, everyone. So we have almost run out of time. There is just one question that I have, which is fairly high level, but I think it really builds on your expertise, sort of the work that you have been doing. And could you answer maybe in 1 minute? I would be curious to hear from you. What is it that, in terms of, say, and I don't want to use the word just like AI readiness, but just since we have sort of moved further than that, I would love to hear what is it sort of in terms of AI in the public sector, what is it that you would like to see, say, in the next year? I will start with, are there any volunteers to start, by the way? Great. I will start with Jamie then. I see you've just unmuted the microphone.
Sure. You know what? I think we're already starting to see some of it. It's just like, you know, starting to focus on this as a topic again, and see that it can be done in parallel and complement the things that we're doing to try to kind of deal with the currently tumultuous time that we're going through. And then I'd also like to see kind of a more growing sense of kind of that these strategies and initiatives, of course, are being implemented, but also are adaptable and evolvable. There are so many strategies that are like here's our strategy from here until 2030. And I think a lot of those are kind of like, well, this is a very fast moving technology and a lot of different changing norms about how it will work. So I'd love to see countries kind of roll out ways that demonstrate how they're going to be advancing and adapting and iterating upon all of the plans that they've launched. Now that everybody's kind of solidified that thing and show that they're willing to evolve and adapt and move in a kind of agile way about how they go about this implementation.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Inga, would you like to go next?
Yes, I think top priority for next year is really developing good practices where AI could help governments to tackle very specific societal challenges and problems. First of all, of course, it is COVID and how to tackle COVID and all the economic and social consequences. And then there is also ongoing climate crisis, and also how AI very practically can be used by governments, by organizations to tackle climate crisis.
Thank you, Inga. And finally, Colin, with a 1-minute closing statement.
Yes, I think we're very much on the same page. So for me, what I would really like to see next year is more transparency of the use now of AI. So I've seen initiatives like the city of Amsterdam recently made an AI register, Helsinki, Nantes, as far as I'm aware. These are the examples that we need to show like, hey, it is not scary. It can really help city life and citizens processes. So this is excellent. I hope that next year we will see many more cities and administrations showing what they're using, what works, how it is functional, and what measures they are taking to ensure that this is indeed a human-centric solution, and any form of bias or problems are known to the organization, right? So that I think it's very important. Hopefully this trend continues and we have much more of these registers next year. Fantastic.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's really been a pleasure hearing your thoughts and you sharing your expertise with us. We will be putting this webinar here, the recording. We will put this on our website on our Twitter. I am just sharing here in the chat for all the attendees our email in case you have any questions. And so, yeah, thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to staying in touch, and we will send out the recording as soon as we've basically polished it a little bit and put it into a nice format. Thank you very much for joining. Have a great day.